August 13th, 2025. In the disputed waters of the South China Sea, a Chinese warship chose to confront the American destroyer USS Higgins in an arrogant, reckless manner. Across the radio, Beijing's captain barked orders in English, boasting of sovereignty, while Coast Guard cutters turned their water cannons on Filipino fishermen. Wooden outriggers, symbols of a livelihood handed down for generations, were forced to retreat before giants of steel. It was humiliation carved into memory. Citizens of a sovereign nation fleeing like intruders in their own waters. Yet the Higgins was no victim. Displacing 9,200 tons, bristling with missiles and sensors, the destroyer was built to embody calm dominance at sea, a floating citadel projecting strength with silent confidence. Every rivet, every antenna was a reminder that American naval power still demands respect. This was no routine patrol. It was a collision of pride, of law, and of raw power. So what really happened in that confrontation? Were any shots fired? Let's find out the truth. August 13th, 2025. At exactly 7:46 a.m., the calm surface of the South China Sea shattered into confrontation. Out on patrol, the American destroyer USS Higgins, a 9,000-ton titan of steel and circuitry, advanced with unwavering precision toward Scarborough Shoal. For Washington, this was no gamble. It was a calculated freedom of navigation operation, a living declaration that sea lanes carrying a third of the world's trade could not be claimed by force or fiat. From the morning haze, shadows materialized. Chinese warships Type 052, D destroyers armed with vertical launch cells, and Type 054A frigates bristling with anti-ship missiles slid into formation like predators circling prey. Their bows cut through the waves in synchronized menace, drawing closer until steel walls loomed within 500 yards of Higgins. Then the radio snapped alive, a sharp, guttural voice in English, laced with threat. U.S. warship, you are in Chinese waters. Leave immediately or face consequences. Every syllable dripped with ultimatum, the tone less warning than command. Moments later, steel muscle moved to enforce words. A frigate slashed across Higgins' bow at a perilous angle, throwing up a wake designed to destabilize her course. Another ship pressed on the starboard side, daring the American destroyer to flinch. This was no routine patrol by Beijing. It was theater, deliberate intimidation, provocation scripted to the inch. The message was unmistakable: yield or be forced to. On Higgins' deck, sailors tightened their grips on cold steel railings, eyes fixed on the gray silhouettes closing in. The orders from the bridge were steady, almost mechanical. Hold course, maintain speed, minimal chatter. Every instinct screamed to react, to fire back at the taunts and the dangerous maneuvers. But discipline bound them tighter than the bolts holding the destroyer together. Not a missile was armed, not a single gun barrel lifted skyward. The most advanced warship in the Pacific endured harassment in silence. For ordinary citizens, the scene was unimaginable. The world's strongest navy restrained before ships of lesser tonnage. But for those trained in modern warfare, the lesson was clear. Power is not measured by how quickly one fires, but by how tightly one controls the urge to do so. The tension was suffocating. One rash command, one panicked squeeze of a trigger, and the clash of steel hulls could ignite a war spanning oceans, dragging two nuclear superpowers and 1.7 billion people into catastrophe. Scarborough Shoal, a mere ring of reefs and rocks, had become the stage for giants where pride pressed against prudence. The silence was heavy, unbearable, almost defiant. If you were the commander of the destroyer USS Higgins, would you order the Chinese ship to be shot? Let's see what the commander decides. The standoff dragged on second by second until time itself seemed stretched to the breaking point. What began as harassment evolved into a tightening noose. Chinese warships pressed closer, circling the American destroyer with deliberate menace. Their formations shifted like wolves testing the strength of a cornered beast. One frigate slashed across Higgins' bow at only 300 yards, an eye blink in naval terms. At that distance, a miscalculation of seconds could mean torn steel, ruptured fuel tanks, and hundreds of sailors thrown into fire and sea. On the bridge of Higgins, calm ruled. Voices were clipped, precise, almost robotic. Steady course, maintain speed. No panic, no rush. The discipline drilled into the crew over years now bore its heaviest weight. Yet beneath the surface of calm, tension boiled. Sailors clenched railings until their knuckles whitened. One later recalled, "It felt like standing in front of a loaded cannon, daring it to fire." Every man aboard knew what their ship carried. 96 vertical launch cells stood silent below deck, each capable of unleashing Tomahawk cruise missiles, Harpoon anti-ship weapons, or SM-2 interceptors. In less than 2 minutes, Higgins could transform every hostile silhouette on radar into flaming wreckage sinking to the ocean floor. It was overwhelming power, a blade so sharp that a single strike could ignite war between two nuclear giants representing nearly 1.7 billion souls. That was the paradox. The destroyer's might was not in doubt, it was in restraint. To unleash firepower at that moment would not have been victory, it would have been catastrophe. Restraint weighed heavier than the 9,200 tons of steel beneath their boots. Yet the humiliation gnawed at the crew. To stand aboard one of the world's most advanced warships, a vessel costing nearly $2 billion, and endure provocations from ships half its capability, was an insult written in spray and shouted over radios. But even as insults flew, Higgins' radar array, SPY-1D, the heart of the Aegis system, tracked everything. Over 200 contacts glowed on its screens. Chinese destroyers, frigates, militia boats, fishing craft, and aircraft overhead. Each one cataloged, each one a potential target. The sailors knew that if the order came, they would strike first, strike fast, strike decisively. Beijing wanted to project dominance. Instead, its captains revealed desperation, pressing close, provoking collisions, gambling lives for propaganda. The Americans endured, not because they were weak, but because they understood the stakes. Restraint was not submission, it was discipline, steel wrapped in control, firepower leashed by law. Yet every heartbeat carried the same truth: patience has limits. And when those limits are crossed, the consequences can shake the world. Yet behind that silence, behind every clenched fist and steady command, lay the true measure of American power. To the untrained eye, USS Higgins seemed cornered, an iron giant harassed by smaller predators, hemmed in and provoked without reply. But appearances deceive. Beneath her decks rested an arsenal capable of rewriting the fate of nations. 96 vertical launch cells stretched down her spine like chambers of a loaded revolver. Each one could be armed with an SM-2 missile streaking skyward at max speeds, an ESSM interceptor ready to swat down incoming threats at close range, or a Tomahawk cruise missile capable of striking land targets more than 1,000 miles away. In raw numbers, this single destroyer carried more firepower than the entire Philippine Navy combined. Its failing CYWS, a Gatling gun spinning at 4,500 rounds per minute, formed a last-ditch wall of steel, ready to shred anything that dared breach the outer layers of defense. Above all, the SPY-1D radar pulsed relentlessly, tracking over 200 contacts simultaneously, separating decoys from real threats with unblinking precision. China's flotilla bristled with its own teeth. The Type 052D destroyers carried the feared YJ-18 anti-ship missile, supersonic, deadly, with a reach of nearly 290 miles and a warhead strong enough to rip through the hull of an aircraft carrier. Alongside them, the smaller Type 054A frigates added dozens more missile tubes, multiplying the appearance of strength in numbers. To propaganda broadcasts in Beijing, this was a vision of dominance. Chinese hulls flanking an American warship, sovereignty enforced by steel. But reality was harsher. Higgins was not alone. She was tied directly into the Aegis command and control web, the most sophisticated naval brain on Earth. Every radar ping, every maneuver of the Chinese ships was mirrored not only on Higgins' consoles, but also in the feeds of satellites high above and submarines lurking in the depths below. In any real clash, the Chinese formation would not last long. Analysts knew it. Commanders on both sides knew it. Within 15 minutes, the gray silhouettes harassing the American destroyer would be reduced to smoking hulks. And yet no missile flew. The Chinese captains did not seek outright annihilation. They sought theater. a show of defiance captured in photographs and broadcast across the world to prove that Beijing would not yield. It was psychological warfare, a contest of images rather than arms. For the Americans aboard Higgins, that was the bitter edge of restraint. To endure jeers and provocation while holding the power to erase the threat in moments was not weakness. It was proof. Proof that the United States did not need to fire to command the seas. Scarborough Shoal was no longer just a reef. It had become a stage where America's destroyer stood tall, not in explosions, but in discipline and strength. But for the fishermen of the Philippines, the sea that fed their families became a place of humiliation. While steel warships measured pride and discipline only miles away, another story unfolded in the shadows, quieter but more devastating. At the edges of Scarborough Shoal, more than 40 wooden boats bobbed in the morning tide, men casting nets into waters that had sustained fathers and grandfathers before them. For these men, the shoal was not a symbol of sovereignty. It was bread on the table, rice in the pot, school fees for children. It was life itself. Then steel descended. Chinese Coast Guard cutters and militia trawlers swept in with sirens wailing, horns blaring across the waves. Their hulls displaced over 2,000 tons, towering above outriggers barely 20 tons. The imbalance was grotesque. Water cannons erupted in white fury, torrents smashing into wooden decks with pressure strong enough to shatter glass and tear nets apart. Several boats staggered under direct hits, their catch lost to the churning sea. Some were rammed deliberately, prows of steel striking beams of wood, nearly capsizing the vessels. Over radios came the insults, sharp, sneering, dehumanizing. Fishermen were branded trespassers, dirty intruders, as if they were vermin to be flushed from their own seas. One veteran fisherman later recalled through tears, "They chased us like rats, like something unworthy to live in the water where our fathers fished." By midday, the outcome was clear. At least a dozen Filipino boats limped back toward Luzon, their nets shredded, families ashore facing hunger and ruin. Generations of subsistence could be undone in a single morning. For them, Scarborough was no longer just a reef, it was a wound. International law had spoken in 2016, affirming these waters as part of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. But law is fragile when confronted with power. Paper rulings dissolve when steel hulls press forward, when cannons of water erase livelihoods. From the deck of USS Higgins, sailors could see the distant flashes, the arcs of spray, the scatter of tiny silhouettes. Yet orders bound them. No intervention, no rescue, only silence. A destroyer worth billions, bristling with missiles, forced to watch as allies were treated like trespassers in their own home. The contrast was brutal. A superpower's warship endured harassment without response, while Allied fishermen were driven out like insects. On that morning, the South China Sea exposed its cruelest truth. China's hunger for control had no mercy, not even for unarmed civilians. Scarborough Shoal is little more than a ragged ring of reefs and rocks, barely breaking the ocean surface. To the naked eye, it seems insignificant, a patch of coral adrift in endless blue. Yet this speck has become one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth, because control of these waters means control of the arteries of global trade. Every year, over $3.5 trillion worth of goods flows through the South China Sea. Nearly one-third of the world's maritime commerce, more than 60,000 merchant ships, transits these lanes. Oil tankers alone carry more than 15 million barrels of crude daily, fueling the lifeblood of Japan, South Korea, and even the United States. Whoever dictates passage here holds a hand on the throat of the global economy. For Beijing, dominance at Scarborough is not about fishing rights or reefs. It is about leverage. With control, China could delay, divert, or even cut off vital shipments. It could wage economic war without firing a shot, strangling adversaries through shipping lanes instead of missile salvos. For Washington, the stakes are no less severe. The credibility of its alliances hangs in the balance. If the Philippines, a treaty ally, is abandoned to water cannons and rammings, what faith can Japan or South Korea place in American promises? Already, Chinese state media broadcasts each encounter as proof of defiance, chipping away at regional confidence in U.S. resolve. Yet the patrol of USS Higgins showed another truth. The United States remains present, steel on the water, enforcing the principle that no nation owns the world's sea lanes. Even without firing a shot, the destroyer's steady course declared that freedom of navigation is not negotiable. Scarborough Shoal is no longer just a reef. It is a symbol, a contest between two futures, one ruled by international law and one ruled by brute force. And in that contest, every confrontation is more than an incident. It is a test of America's role as the guarantor of peace on the world's oceans. The confrontation at Scarborough Shoal ended without a missile launched or a gun fired. Yet the silence carried a message far more powerful than any exchange of fire could have conveyed. For the sailors aboard USS Higgins, the morning was a trial of discipline and restraint. Every step on deck, every tightened grip on steel railings, and every calm, firm command from the bridge was imbued with the knowledge that a single wrong decision could ignite a global crisis. Though the crew had the capability to unleash overwhelming firepower, their orders were clear: maintain course, protect the principles of international law, and avoid escalation at all costs. Meanwhile, the fishermen of the Philippines endured a far harsher reality. Their small wooden vessels, insignificant next to the massive warships, were harassed, sprayed with high-pressure water, and intimidated over radio. Nets were torn, catches lost, and livelihoods threatened. These civilians faced humiliation and danger that the USS Higgins could observe, but not directly intervene to prevent. Their plight underscored the stark contrast between the restraint exercised by superpowers and the vulnerability of ordinary people caught in the crossfire. Scarborough Shoal became more than a territorial dispute. It was a test of global power, patience, and moral responsibility. True strength was measured not by the missiles loaded on deck, but by the ability to hold back, to enforce rules without immediate recourse to violence. The lesson for the world was clear: peace is fragile, law is only as effective as those who uphold it, and restraint is one of the most potent forms of power in the modern era. For America and its allies, the encounter reaffirmed that maintaining international order requires courage, discipline, and unwavering vigilance. Heat, heat, heat. Hey, heat.